Prior to developing West Wickham Estate, Dashwood had embarked on a grand tour of Europe, Asia Minor, and Russia. He visited Baalbek in Lebanon, and based the design of the nave of St. Lawrence Church, from the ruins of the Roman temple in Lebanon. Dashwood is said to have taken an interest in the Greek Eleusinian mysteries. This point was noted by the 11th Baronet in his book, The Dashwoods of West Wickham.
Why he chose to have a long and winding tunnel dug a quarter of a mile into the hill, with all sorts of chambers and divided passages, instead of just enlarging the quarry, is still, however, a mystery. The design is obviously symbolic, and is thought to have something to do with the Eleusinian mysteries of ancient Greece.
Was Dashwood's cave expansion project an attempt to replicate some of the former pagan sites he'd visited on his grand tour of Europe, sites which hundreds of years ago would have been used by the Gnostics to practice Eleusinian rites? Michael Howard has previously pointed out that a senior member of the Hellfire Club had said that the club was dedicated to the revival of the Eleusinian mysteries. Could that member have been the parliamentarian and Lord Mayor of London, John Wilkes? Here's a quote from a letter written by Wilkes, that was published in 1763.
No profane eye has dared to penetrate into the English Eleusinian mysteries of the chapter room, where the monks assembled on all solemn occasions, the most secret rites were performed, and libations poured forth in much pomp to the Bonadaire.
The Eleusinian mysteries are not fully understood, and are open to a degree of speculation. In short, they are a shamanic pagan goddess cult, associated with life, death, the afterlife, rebirth, and immortality. History refers to these cult members as being of the Gnostic tradition, but they called themselves the Telestai in their heyday. Today, historians use the term mystery school to describe their creed. The researcher and author, John Lamb Lash, provides details of the origins of the Telestai's pagan mystery school, and tells us what their aim was.
It so happens that as far back as 6000 BC, in the area of the Caspian Sea and the Caucasus Mountains, a movement was founded. And this was a movement of shamans, men and women who practiced shamanism using entheogenic plants. And this particular group, which came to be known as the Magian Order, had a focus. They were the first people who focused in their minds the identity and intelligence of the earth with the aim of communicating with the earth as a living being. And so in their process of investigating how they could interact with the earth, how they could access the intelligence of the planet, they developed a myth, which is a guiding story. It's a product of human imagination, but it's filled with the divine presence. And they developed this myth because they experienced the divine presence directly. So they were a very special order. They developed over many centuries. And the Gnostics who appeared in Syria and the Middle East and the Levant can be defined as the real original intelligence community. They are the intelligence community of the planet. They are the planetary intelligence community. And their goal and mission was to preserve the sacred guiding narrative, which is the story of this planet. And the central figure in this story is a goddess figure that they called Sophia.
The Telestai purposefully maintained a vow of silence concerning the inner workings of their shamanistic cult.
The essence of what occurred in the mysteries that was protected by this vow of silence was divine mathesis. Mathesis is the Greek word that really means instruction. Divine mathesis, sacred education, sacred instruction. The initiates were led to the organic light, which is the direct revelation of the pleromic luminosity of the goddess Sophia, who embodies the earth. And in this mystical encounter with this light, which I would emphasize was the same for everyone, they entered into a communication with the light, and they learned from the light about how to develop their own potential as human beings and how to educate and guide the human race to the fulfillment of its highest potential. Now, if you want to form a concept in your mind of what the mysteries really were, that explains exactly what they were.
The Telestai consumed the hallucinogenic Kykeon brew at secret rituals inside the Telestrion at Eleusis, and at other sites in ancient Greece. The Kykeon brew allowed them to directly interact with what is known as the organic light. The organic light is the earth goddess Sophia, or more simply, the feminine intelligence that lives inside planet Earth.
the telestai of the mysteries stood in the presence of nature and in the sacred precincts, such as at Eleusis, and saw this massive light which actually wells up out of the material world. It wells up out of matter. It doesn't shine through space the way the light that we are accustomed to seeing is. The encounter with this light was what the mysteries were really about. And it was the most profound learning experience, and is today, that any human being can have. And in that encounter with the light, the initiates learned about human potential. They learned about all kinds of real practical things, like beekeeping, navigation, astronomy, art, music. What do you think they learned about the Fibonacci series and the phi function? They knew fractals. They knew the Fibonacci series because they were taught that by their encounters with the light, combined with their careful observations of nature.
In other talks, Lasch mentions the practice of eroticism, and/or uninhibited sexual practices, as being part of the goddess tradition. Dashwood's Hellfire Club was popularly known for the sexual activities of its members, and their female companions. This is another indication that the Hellfire Club was almost certainly engaging in some form of paganism, quite possibly the Gnostic goddess tradition being discussed here. Another clue is the claim that the male and female reproductive organs have been symbolically incorporated into the cave's design. Here, the triangle would represent the female component, and the miner's cave would symbolize the male component. Lasch coined the term, salon Satanism, to describe the superficial and theatrical practice of Satanism that became popular in the 20th century. The Hellfire Club could be described as a private venue for salon Satanism, long before the practice became part of modern culture. The researcher and author, Graham Hancock, provides further details of Eleusinian rites.
If you go to Eleusis in ancient Greece, it's a ruin now outside of Athens. But for more than 2,000 years, until the 4th century after Christ, Eleusis was the beating heart of the ancient Greek world. And again, like Chavin de Huantar, it turns out that there are enormous underground galleries, darkened spaces, which they called the Telestrion. We now know what was going on there. The initiates in the Eleusinian mysteries came and drank a brew before they went down into the Telestrion. That brew essentially was LSD. It was a non-poisonous form of ergot growing on barley, which they then harvested and cooked up in the brew called the kykion. So no wonder when people went down into the Telestrion, into those darkened spaces which were subtly lit here and there, that they would have life-transforming experiences. Plato was an initiate, Sophocles was an initiate, Cicero was an initiate, Pindar was an initiate. They all said that the experience they had had in the Telestrion after drinking the brew was life-changing. They lost utterly their fear of death. They knew that death was not the end, but just the beginning of the next great adventure. And those spaces were the heart of everything that was good and worthy and worthwhile about ancient Greek culture. And it's a comment upon the way that civilization has gone, that it was fanatical early Christianity that destroyed Eleusis and that put an end to those rites that had been so life-affirming and so life-enhancing for so long.
Dashwood seems to have taken a particular interest in the Greek myth of the river Styx, as he supposedly named an underground stream in the caves by the same name. In Greek mythology, the river Styx is described as a barrier between the world of the living and the world of the dead, or the underworld. The newly dead pay the ferryman Charon to carry them safely across the river Styx, where they wait in the underworld to be reborn, or choose to stay there as a final resting place.
Originally it was a river, so you had to cross the river to get to the famous inner temple, where all these so-called nefarious deeds happened. And there was a boat there, and there used to be probably a villager, I suppose. It was all a bit of a charade even in those days, but there was a villager there who would have taken you across, and you were meant to give him a shilling to take you across, just like Charon. Charon was the boatman in mythological times who took you across to the underworld. So my ancestor was trying to sort of recreate this idea of going down to the inner temple.
Researcher Livio Stecchini believed that the knowledge of the geographic placing of monuments was an integral part of the Eleusinian mysteries, and it would seem that its practitioners had used their knowledge of geometry and geodesy for such purposes.